We're sitting here talking in Washington, and you have said that you felt you were born in the wrong country.
Yes.
Why did you feel that?
It's a bit like the question, or it was for me a bit like the question, why did I want to be a writer? Essentially unanswerable. I could only say that it was more that I felt I had to rather than I wanted to. And when I was not much older, I was in my mid-teens, I began to have a very strong feeling of a sort of pull from the American planet. It's the best way I can think of phrasing it. Didn't know why. None of my family had ever been. Didn't know much about it, but a very strong gravitational pull, which eventually I succumbed to. And now, because, as you know, Kierkegaard says life has to be lived forward and then reviewed backwards, now I sort of do know, in that they were versions, the two things, of the same. In order for me to become an independent, self-starting writer, I had to move to the United States, had to leave England. Why, you may ask, I don't know, but it could have something to do with the relative openness of the United States. You didn't have to keep on sort of passing so many approval tests, as you did seem to in London.
You're a polemicist.
Yes.
And you look at our country now with its coalition government,
yes,
muddling along,
yes,
as it's muddled along for many long years. And how do you feel? I mean, could you exist there?
In Britain I have half of my life still to look back on. I was about 30 when I left. A lot of that was formative. It's where I learned to love literature, and a look at my bookshelves would show what I like still. Anglo-American is what I am. I think it's quite a nice synthesis. What do I think about the Cameron-Clegg coalition? It doesn't make me think all that much, I have to say.
That speaks volumes in itself, doesn't it?
It might, yes. Also, I suppose, for historical reasons, I joined the Labour Party as soon as I was eligible to do so. I watch more the future and character of the Labour Party. I still feel involved in that.
Do you still consider yourself a leftist?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Because, as you know, many of your critics will say what's happened to you is that, you know, as your waistband expanded, your politics moved further to the right.
Well, they should see my waistband now. I've just lost 30 pounds.
Not in
the nicest possible way.
But the accusation
no, of
against
course.
you is...
Well, it's such a well-known script that it is indeed deserving of the name cliché, and I pin that accusation on my accusers. That's what they're resorting to.
So do any of these labels apply to you, leftist or whatever? I mean, you're more of an iconoclast, aren't you?
Well, there isn't a global international working class movement anymore. There used to be. Some of us miss it like a missing limb, but it's gone. Is it likely to be replaced? I don't think so. Is there a socialist theory of an alternative world economy that, just in theory, could stand up against the idea of a market system, however defined? Not conspicuously, no. In fact, the anti-globalizing movement seems to me to be nostalgic for a pre-industrial society in many ways, thus to be rather conservative. From this, you could probably tell that I still think like a Marxist, which I do.
Yes. You believe in the dialectic.
Yes, and in the materialist conception of history. Yeah, I do that.
The end of the Cold War really buggered everything up, didn't it?
Yes, it did, but it was a huge release of human energy. Huge release of human energy and emancipation. It was a great day, November 9th, 1989. I have on my, just behind me, you can see it, a chunk of the Berlin Wall. On my mantelpiece, and I was in Romania to see the end of the Ceausescu regime, the worst of them all. And it materializes my view that human nature is actually incompatible with dictatorship and slavery.
Conflict is intrinsic to human history.
Yes.
And there will be some further conflict. Many people say it has already begun, and it's the conflict between the West and sort of Islamofascism. Do you think that is a conflict which can be lost by the West?
Well, first on conflict, you're completely right. It's unavoidable, and I'm glad of that because I think it's desirable. Especially in the United States, there's a huge privilege given to the word unity or unification, partly because it's a very various and multifarious society. There's a big need for good manners. But if you say, I'm a unifier, not a divider, you expect and you usually get applause. I'm a divider. I think only division can cause progress. People say the politics of division. Politics is division by definition. If there was no disagreement, if there was no fight, there'd be no politics. So the illusion of unity isn't worth having, and anyway it's unattainable. What I do think of as the greatest crisis, greatest conflict at present is, it's a version of the old conflict, which is between totalitarianism and free thought, which is, in other words, between theocracy and the Enlightenment. And the form in which this is currently being played out, you could define as the West versus Islam, but it's not quite so. Within many Islamic countries, there are people who have a greater respect for pluralism than there are people in Britain who would like to censor me for criticizing Islam, for example. But roughly you described the outlines correctly. Yes, I refuse to be told what to think or how, let alone what to say or write by anybody, but most certainly not by people who claim the authority of fabricated works of primeval myth and fiction and want me to believe that these are divine. That I won't have. That's the original repudiation. The first rebellion against mental slavery comes from saying, this is man-made, it's not divine.
And to be clear about what you're talking about here, you're talking about the Bible and the Quran.
Yeah, well, and the Torah, yes. Yeah.
All of these are works of fiction.
All of these are depraved works of man-made fiction, yeah.
And in what way does saying that you find the Quran laughable in places, in what way does that help the spread of reason?
Oh, well, I think mockery of religion is one of the most essential things, because to demystify supposedly holy texts that are dictated by God and show that they are man-made, what you have to show their internal inconsistencies and absurdities. And one of the beginnings of human emancipation is the ability to laugh at authority. It's an indispensable thing. People can call it blasphemy if they like, but if they call it that, they have to assume that there's something to be blasphemed, some divine word. Well, I don't accept the premise.
A lot of people in your position might take Pascal's wager. They might say, I don't know whether I'm right or wrong.
Yes.
But if I accept the possibility of there being a purpose and a God, I can't lose either way, because if there isn't, I've lost nothing, and if there is, I gain.
Yes.
Why haven't you done that?
Well, I thought about Pascal's wager and wrote about it in my book long before I became possibly mortally sick. And what I said about it was this. Shall we just quickly state what it says? I mean,
yes, please.
Well, Pascal was a great mathematician and one of the founders of probability theory, actually. I think it's his lowest point, is what's called his wager, or sometimes his gambit, where he says, rather like a huckster, what have you got to lose? You win everything if you bet on God, and you've everything to lose if you're wrong. Well, what does this involve, if it's correct? It involves a very cynical God, and a rather stupid one, who will say, I noticed you make a profession of faith just there, and I also, because I'm God, I know why you did, because it was in the hope of winning favor with me. Well, that's fine. You'll therefore get it. That seems to me a rather contemptible thing, and necessarily, therefore, to entail a rather contemptible human being who says, I don't really believe this, I have no faith, but what can I lose by pretending to God that I do? I might get a break. I mean, this is pretty low, isn't it? If I'm surprised to find, when I pass on from this vale of tears, that I'm facing a tribunal, which you notice, by the way, you're not allowed to bring a lawyer. There's no jury. There's no appeal. I mean, this is altogether unattractive. Why people want it to be believed their God is this way, I don't know. But suppose that I'm there. It may be a one-person tribunal, depending on your view of the Trinity. I would say, I hope you noticed that I didn't try and curry favor, that I was honestly unable to believe in the claims made by your human spokespersons. Now do I get any understanding? And if that doesn't work, well, then I don't know what would. But I'm not going to try anything servile. I'm resolved on that point.
It would be more comforting, wouldn't it? And more comfortable.
Which the servile? No.
To make an accommodation, to have some belief in a possibility of this not being the end.
Well, as long as I don't have to take the word of other humans on what are the necessary propitiations and gestures and subjections I have to submit myself to in order to qualify. In other words, there are many, many discrepant religions, all of whom say only if I support them or endorse them will I qualify. Well, now, I don't know that there is no such thing as consciousness without the brain, for example, that there's no such survival. I'd very much doubt it. But let's say we don't know enough to say it's impossible. I would say what is impossible is that other humans can know what the conditions are whereby you qualify for survival. That I do know is false.
Do you fear death?
No, I'm not afraid of being dead, that's to say. There's nothing to be afraid of. I won't know I'm dead. In my strong conviction, I won't. And if I find that I'm alive in any way at all, well, that'll be a pleasant surprise. I quite like surprises. But I strongly take leave to doubt it. I can't be too insouciant. I mean, one can't live without fear. It's a question of what is your attitude towards fear. I'm afraid of a sordid death. I'm afraid that I would die in an ugly or squalid way. I mean, cancer can be very pitiless in that respect.
That's a fear of dying. It's not a fear of death, though.
Quite. So I forget now which you asked.
What do you
It's a good distinction.
What do you think?
Of death, no. Of dying, yes, I feel a sense of waste about it because I'm not ready. I feel a sense of betrayal to my family, and I like to think even to some of my friends who would miss me. Undone things, unattained objectives, but as I said before, I hope I'd always have that if I was 100 when I was checking out. But no, I think my main fear is of being incapacitated or imbecilic at the end. That, of course, is not something to be afraid of, it's something to be terrified of.
Bertrand Russell said, I believe that when I die, my body will rot, full stop.
Well, who doesn't? I mean, it will.
That's it.
Well, that's... He does go on to say a bit more than that, but that's uncontroversial. I mean, nobody expects to get their old body back. I certainly don't want the body back that I'll die with, and nobody would. It would be doing no one any favours. So some reassembly of atoms would have to occur, but that would have to occur anyway, if only for us to be reunified with those who died so that we could live and got blown to pieces for doing so.
Do you think it's been a life well lived?
I'd really have to leave that to others, Jeremy. I have to. I'm encouraged, I'll say this much, I've been encouraged in the last few months by some extraordinarily generous letters, including, these are the ones I take most to heart, from people I've never met or don't know. If they say that what I've written or done or said means anything to them, then I'm happy to take it at face value for once. I'll take that. And yes, it cheers me up. And I hope it isn't written with the intention of doing so, though I must allow for it possibly being for that reason. But in case you are watching this, anybody, and you ever wonder whether to write to anyone, always do, because you'd be surprised by how much difference it can make. Here's a regret, I regret not doing it more often myself.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.